I am so excited for today's video because this is part of a collaboration with my very good friend here in the community, Alexandra, over at A Lovely Jaunt. I highly recommend that you check out her channel because she is so unlike other members in the booktube community. She doesn't talk about a lot of the mainstream books that a lot of people are talking about in the community today. So if you're looking for something truly fresh, original, and especially coming from someone who speaks so professionally and eloquent, I can't recommend this channel to you enough. So she got in touch with me to ask me if she wanted me to participate in a question discussion series. And this is about book to film adaptations and how we view them. So I am really excited to tackle these 5 questions that she gave me, and I've got them right over here. I'm also willing to provide some very interesting examples. And probably the more interesting thing about these questions is I don't necessarily think that all the answers are going to be in black and white, because as someone who is a big believer in don't judge a book by its movie, I am someone who enjoys reading a good book but also loves watching a great film, regardless of whether it's an adaptation or it's an original story. I've even done videos in the past where I talk about films that have become adapted based on novels and graphic novels alike, and I am really excited to go a little bit further into this topic with some really great discussions. So I'd also like to get an opportunity to see what your answers would be after you watch this video, because I would love for this discussion to continue. So without further ado, let's get into the 5 questions. So the first question is, what is my favorite film or TV adaptation of a book, and what made it successful? Well, that is probably the easiest question to answer, because it is without a doubt Peter Jackson's directorial trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. And by that I also mean the extended editions, because there was a great deal more of film in each of these 3 extended films. But as someone who knew that there was going to be a trilogy based on one of the greatest fantasy series of all time, I wanted to make sure that I read the books first. And I have to say that the adaptation of these films based on these 3 novels couldn't be more perfect from a storytelling perspective, a character building perspective, but more importantly, a film production overall. Now granted, there is a lot of stuff in the books that is not in the film, like the songs, for example. There also was a great deal of things that were changed or added, but quite frankly, when I watched these films, especially when I got to the end of Return of the King, I was so happy with the changes that director Peter Jackson made, because I hated how Return of the King ended. I don't want to give it away because I know that there are still people out there that have not read these books. And also, I would recommend the Hobbit trilogy, even though the book I think is way better than the film. I was a big fan of The Hobbit when I first read it, and it is my second favorite book of all time. But the reason why The Lord of the Rings was such a successful film trilogy, I mean, for crying out loud, it won Best Picture for Return of the King. Peter Jackson won Best Director, and it swept the Oscars in 2004. But the reason why it was so successful was not just because of the fandom alone and newcomers to this whole story. It was just the tender love and care that everybody that was attached to these 3 films put into it. The movies, from a filmmaking standpoint, are near perfect. Every actor plays a great role. The fact that not a single one of them, especially for Return of the King, were nominated for a Best Actor or Actress or Supporting Actor or Actress just shows that this was a collective effort to make truly great films based on one of the most beloved book series of all time. And the best part is, these films, like their books, have truly stood the test of time. I have watched these films many times over, and I still think that they are the 3 best films ever made. Number 2 is, are book lovers too harsh on movie adaptations, and are there ways to overlook these films when judging them, and should we take those ideas into consideration? That's a very interesting question. Do I think that book lovers are too harsh to their film counterparts? I will say the answer is no, and that is because of the fact that we have something in this world called freedom of expression. You're allowed to be as kind or as harsh to an adaptation of a film based on a book, and we also have to understand that fans are fans. We love popular culture. We love our books and our films and our music. We are just fans, and that is what we do. And do I feel that being harsh on a film is something that should not be done? Absolutely not. Because sometimes a film based on a book can be beautifully adapted, but sometimes it can be absolutely disastrous. Even if it follows the book page for page, maybe with one or two tiny little changes, it could still end up being a disaster. I think perfect examples could be the Hunger Games trilogy or the Divergent trilogy, which ended up not even being finished because they decided to take the last book and split it into two, and because of how horribly the third film ended up doing at the box office, they decided not to even finish it. Just shows that even when you try to closely adapt a book to a film, sometimes you cannot even get it right. It's based on how the film is directed. It's based on the characters that are portrayed by the actors. It just doesn't work sometimes. So we have the right to be very harsh. But even when certain changes are made, when you go back into the pages of those books and you realize for cinematic value, yes, certain things would not have worked. A perfect example for that would be the film adaptation of Ready Player One. Ready Player One as a book is one of my favorite books, but I love the film, and I know for a solid fact that if certain things in that book would have been adapted to the films, it probably would have not been an overall enjoyment for general people who had never even read the book. As a matter of fact, some people might have found the original plot of the book absolutely boring. So sometimes changes are good, but does that mean that they have to be accepted by everybody? No. Question number 3 is, what are some examples of how a film can go beyond what a book can do? I'm going to step outside of the box a little bit in regards to books in general, because one of the few things that we here at the BookTube community love to talk about besides physical books is graphic novels. And graphic novels are very different from books because they do in fact give us pictures. So sometimes you get to see the characters, and you get to see a great story unfold through illustrations as well as written word. But when it comes to comic books, I will say that there are some excellent adaptations in film, and I want to purposely bring out 2 examples amongst many, and those are the Warner Brothers DC Universe film series. This is just 2, but there's a great bunch more. Original stories and comic book adaptations, and one of the few things that those films do very well, they fill in the gaps in the panels, because you read a comic book, you, let's say, read The Flash, for example, and you see him running at top speed. You see him run from point A to point B. But the question is, what exactly happens between point A and point B? You can't necessarily do that in the pages of a comic book because there's still frame illustrations. It's not in motion. To give the opportunity to turn those illustrations into animated versions of themselves, get the opportunity to see what happens between the panels can actually expand on the story and expand on the characters in very subtle or absolutely phenomenal ways. And that's what I love so much about those DC animated films, the fact that we're actually able to see these graphic novel stories unfold. And let me tell you, there have been some great page-for-page adaptations. A perfect example would be The Dark Knight Returns. It is a beautiful direct adaptation from the original comic book, and the fact that we see it in an animated format and see so many additional nuances throughout the film just makes it all the more enjoyable when you compare it to its actual source material. Question number 4 is, what are some ways that book lovers are right when a film cannot match what books can do? That's a very tough question to answer because I don't necessarily feel that there are certain books that cannot be turned into films. Do they always work? The answer, of course, is no. A perfect example of a book that is so hard to adapt to a film is probably Cloud Atlas. But the Wachowskis tried their hardest to actually turn it into a film. Was the film good? No. The film was absolutely dreadful. But you have to give credit to the fact that people try to actually turn it into an actual film. Maybe certain books are well off just left alone, but I don't feel that there's any reason why we cannot try, because one of the few things that we also need to know as a society is that there are so many people out there that do not read books. They just don't like to do it. There's also so many people out there that will not read certain books. I'll give you a perfect example, and please don't judge me for this, but I had no intentions to read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, nor did I have any intentions of reading The Hate U Give. But I was very curious to see the films, and I did think that the films, for lack of a better word, effort was made to truly please the fans of the books. Even though there were some subtle changes in both of them, many people overall had an overwhelming decent feeling towards those two specific film adaptations. But sometimes, to be fair to the booktubers out there or the book lovers out there, sometimes things are just better off being left to the imagination. And maybe because of the fact that there are certain stories out there that are way too imaginative, just to actually put them into film or television might actually be a much bigger challenge than people think that it could be. Like Game of Thrones, for example. I think the biggest challenge was the fact that the creators of the show had to think and create their own stories because of the fact that they were basing their material on a book series that wasn't even finished. And unfortunately, we saw the end result, and very few people truly appreciated the end of Game of Thrones. It's also a topic that I would like to actually give towards a filmmaking perspective. Films in general, we're getting into an age where everything is being revived and rebooted, and there are pointless sequels being made. I truthfully believe that when a certain film franchise is over, sometimes it's good to just let sleeping dogs lie. I don't necessarily feel that we need to continue on a story, even though there is definitely more of a story to tell. And if there's any perfect example that I can give in regards to that, it's Harry Potter. We had the 7 books. We had the 8 films. People loved the books. People loved the films. But The Cursed Child is very hit or miss. We didn't need that. People are very upset over the Fantastic Beast films right now. Did we need them? No. But is it nice to see more stories in the wizarding world? Sure. But sometimes things are just better off left to the imagination. And for me, I would not want to see sequels to the Harry Potter saga itself, because I just don't feel we need them. Even though I would love to see what Harry is like as an adult, we can always just leave that up to the imagination. Same for books as well. And the final question is, should we even compare books to their film adaptations, or should they be considered separate works of art? The answer is yes, and the answer is no. And I would probably say, when it comes to more beloved stories like Harry Potter, that is really where we need to take the books and the films and separate them and look at them separately as art. It's always fun to compare and contrast because you just have excellent discussions. But I love the books. I know for a solid fact that the books are better than the films. But I love the movies. I just love the fact that they brought these characters to life. I love the actors who portrayed the characters. The films are so much fun to watch as much as the books are fun to read. And I just feel that the more we get certain stories in various forms of media, the better those stories are going to reach people, the better chances these stories are going to connect with people. That also leads to the more chances of the fact that these stories will not be forgotten. They will be preserved. They will be remembered. They will be passed on to future generations. I still feel that When you see that there is a movie coming out based on a truly beloved book, however, I always feel it is better to read the book before you see the film. I have gone into the trap where I have not read the books before the films, and examples would be Andy Weir's The Martian, or Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl. I've seen the movies, and I love those two movies. I think that Gone Girl was the best film that came out for its respective year, and I am terrified to read that book because I love that movie so damn much. And that's basically the way I feel about adaptions. They're good to have, they're not always necessary, but we can always compare, and we shouldn't compare. I really hope that that does make sense to you. But that wraps up my questions, everybody. I really hope that you appreciated my answers. Please leave your comments in the box below. Let's have a discussion. I really would like that. And if you think that these questions are things that you would like to make a video for so you can answer them, please do. Myself and Alexandra, we would love to see those, and we would love to talk to you about them. So thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.